Hello, it's Kate Stillman, and welcome back to the Yogahealer Podcast. In this series, I'm going all into Ayurveda. I was talking with my friend Elsie Escobar, who's one of the co-founders of She Podcast. And Elsie let me know we had one of the longest standing and largest followings of Ayurvedic podcast, if not the largest in the world. And I thought to myself, well, maybe we should talk more about just nuts and bolts of Ayurveda, because if that's what people are coming to the Yoga Healer show for, I'd love for you all to have the basics and to know how to go deeper into Ayurveda in a way that's super practical and easy. And that's what this series is all about. So last month we did a series on stress. I highly recommend listening to it. It's actually a much more advanced series than this month's Ayurvedic series. So this month we've talked about what is Ayurveda. That was the first show of the series. The second was what is Vata Dosha. And now this third one is what is Pitta Dosha. And then the next one will go into Kapha. So today we're talking about what is Pitta? What is it like to have a Pitta constitution? And what happens when Pitta goes out of balance? So those are the three main things that we're looking at today. We'll also talk a bit about the symptoms of Pitta, what foods someone who needs to be on a Pitta-reducing diet should eat, which foods they should avoid, and then also how do you calm Pitta down? How do you calm down the raging forest fires when you have a Pitta imbalance? Okay, so again, if you don't really understand much about the doshas, go back and listen to that very first podcast in this series on what is Ayurveda, because I talk a lot about this trilogy of energies, how the one universal energy has three different functions. It has the catabolic function, which is the energy of dispersing, that's the Vata energy. It has the energy of heat-based transformation, that's the Pitta energy we'll talk about more about today. And then it has the anabolic, building, rejuvenating, cohesive energy, and that is the energy of Kapha, which we'll talk about more in the next episode. All right, so that brings us to what is Pitta. So if you take your hand in front of your mouth and you exhale, notice how you feel the wind, that's Vata, the heat, that's Pitta, and the moisture, and that is Kapha. And that's just a really easy way to see that, yes, indeed, you have all three forces within you. In fact, you have all three forces within every cell of your body. So we all have all three doshas. Today we're talking about what is Pitta and what is the Pitta constitution. So the word itself, Pitta, you can hear a lot of P's and T's in it. Pitta comes from a root word of tap. And those of you who are yogis know the word tapas or tapasya, which means the austerity of practice. So there's a part of Pitta that's direct and to the point. Like when you talk about austerities, it's not like the fun, happy, enthusiastic times. It's the hard work. So the other part of Pitta is to heat. And so anyone who has done a fiery yoga practice, anyone who's been on the yogic path or the path of enlightenment knows that there's a level of intensity. And that's really what this dosha is all about. It's an intensity. If you take your hands and you rub them together really hard, really fast, you'll notice you generate heat. So the friction of pointing your awareness in a single direction, that generates heat, the heat to cut through the BS. So in the body, Pitta is the function of digestion. It's the function of cooking, if you will. If you think about like when you eat food, how does it become energy? How does it become functional bodily tissue? Something has to transform. There has to be a metabolic transformation to the molecules of food to become the molecules of your body. And that functional transformation is caused by Pitta. Now, you can also think about this in terms of your mind, right? When you have an idea and you really start to think things through and you work out the problem sets, you work out the critical issues within that idea itself, there's a level of digestion and transformation that happens on the mental level. In the body, the neuropeptides, the neurotransmitters that happen as part of the mind function, that's all part of Pitta. Other parts of the body that are dominated by Pitta are the small intestine, which is where digestion and absorption, that's where showtime is there. The blood in general, the red warmth of the blood. The liver, which is the blood organ, right, which is constantly filtering and is making the blood more potent. That's a Pitta organ. Gallbladder's a Pitta organ. The sight, like your ability to see, that the sight is related to Pitta. I didn't talk in the Vata episode about how hearing and the sense of touch is related to Vata. The sense of smell, the sense of taste is Kapha, or those are functions of Kapha dosha. Well, sight, the ability to see and have vision, to point yourself in a certain direction, all of that is dominated by Pitta. The connection of the mind-heart digestion, the sadhaka, which I talked a little bit about in that stress and spirituality episode, the part of you that can clearly see the path forward, that is a function of Pitta in Ayurveda. Again, Ayurveda is a mind, body, spirit science, right? And so it's not like, unlike a lot of Western medicine, which actually segregated body from mind back in the 1700s, Ayurveda never did that, right? It's like you have multiple levels of self, you have multiple levels of intelligence, and all of the different parts of yourself, your physical body, your energy body, your pranamaya kosha, your mental, emotional body, manomaya kosha, your intuitive body, vijnanamaya kosha, and your spirit body, your anandamaya kosha. All of these are constantly interconnected, communicating, and functioning as a single organism, which is you, right? So an organized organism thrives. One that has a lot of disconnect does not thrive. So if, for example, your heart and your mind are not in sync, are not in integrity, that will create a Pitta type imbalance over time due to Sadhaka Pitta. Okay, now let's talk, now that we have a little bit of an idea of what Pitta does, that it heats, it digests, it transforms, let's just talk a little bit about the qualities of Pitta so that you can start to understand what Pitta feels like in your body, what it feels like in your mind. And the qualities or gunas that we talked about in the What is Ayurveda podcast 2 episodes ago, the gunas, right, are the adjectives, the descriptors. So the qualities of Pitta itself are that it's hot. Like you stick your hand in the fire and we all know what happens. You get burned. Now the feeling of a burn, think about it, it's sharp, right? There's nothing soft about, like you put your hand in water, water's pretty soft. You put your hand in fire, it's the opposite. There's a sharpness to it. It's light. It's liquidy. It has a spreading quality. Think of a forest fire. And it's slightly oily in nature. Even if you think of like looking at a campfire, how the fire itself moves in an oily way. It has color in it. If you look at a fire, it's not just red, right? It's also orange. It's also yellow. You'll also see green, sometimes blue in fire. And that's its nature, is that it actually has a lot of color to it. If we look at these qualities in the mind, the sharpness of the mind is the nature of a Pitta mind, that it naturally can process and digest a lot of information and come into a place of coherence, come into a place of deeper understanding. So that digestive mental process is what most people that have more of Pitta in their mind body and their mental constitution, they experience that. And sometimes what happens, when they're in balance is they actually are a gateway for others to have deeper understanding. This is something that my course members comment on the time with me, is that there's a level of sharpness in my ability to perceive and my ability to like cut through some of their stuck patterns, that I can just do it really quickly and hit the nail on the head, so to speak. And that's, when you sharpen a knife, that's what it's able to do. It's able to cut through quickly and cleanly. And that's the nature of a Pitta mind. It's discriminating in nature, right? It's separating the wheat from the chaff. It's separating the truth from the BS. That's just the natural power of Pitta. in the mind. We talked in the last episode about the natural power of Vata in the mind is creativity and enthusiasm and thinking outside the box. So each of the doshas have their special superpowers, if you will. And the power of Pitta is this intensity and the ability to have critical thinking. Now, on the flip side, if Pitta goes out of balance, and this is where the fire gets too hot, where the balance of the doshas and the person's constitution, where Prakriti, right, becomes imbalanced by Vikruti, right? So Vikruti is the nature of the imbalance. So the nature of a Pitta type of imbalance, if we look at it in the mind first, you got it, the person they can become conceited, guilty as charged. They can become hypercritical to themselves and to other people, frustrated. These are all natural, very common imbalances of the Pitta type mind. They can even go to the extreme of fanaticism. And part of the thing about Pitta is Pitta is very direct. And you can hear even in my speech, I have a very Pitta type of speech where there's a little bit of kapha behind it. There's a little bit of sustenance behind it. So it's direct with a lot of power. If that goes too far, right, you get fanaticism. You get a leader who's strong, direct, could totally be wrong, could totally be insane, but they're delivering it with such power, such force, and they're so convincing that, basically they're leading people astray instead of leading people into their potential. So that's the maximum imbalance of Pitta in the mind. It's a little bit on the extreme side. The extreme side of Vata I didn't talk about last time, but I'll drop that in here. Can be where the person's thinking so far outside of the box that they're not able to relate at all to the real world. And so they just seem totally out there, kind of crazy. All right, now the ability of a Pitta type to judge, to evaluate and to judge can also make them quite judgmental. It can make them critical. It can make them more perfectionistic, not just to themselves, but, in their parenting methods or with their friends or whatnot. And that can be super annoying, right? And so I talked about last time that I would tell you a little bit about the paradox and how in the paradox is the healing. So one of the paradoxes of Pitta in the mind is that to have compassion, to actually soften and try to see with empathy all sides of the situation. And for a lot of Pitta types, this can be the hardest work. Just like with the Vata types, we talked about how faith, true faith, embodied energetically, feeling the support of the universe and feeling that as faith, that can be so hard. Pittas won't have that trouble nearly as much. They won't have trouble with unworthiness. They'll have trouble more with hyperworthiness. And so for Pittas to be compassionate, to be self-compassionate, to drop the perfectionism, to go into life learner mindset, not just for themselves, but for everybody they're working with and see how people are learning around them, that's very, very powerful. Now let's talk about Pitta dosha in the body. And I'm going to read a little bit too, like I did last time, from Dr. Ladd's textbook. This is textbook 2, textbook of Ayurveda, complete guide to clinical assessment. So body frames of Pitta tend to be medium. Body weight tends to be medium. Their face can be angular. Their eyes are often quite sharp and intense. They often have a lot of sensitivity to light. Often Pittas will get headaches with intense light. They'll want to sleep with blackout curtains or blackout face mask. They'll wake easily to light. Their eyes again are super sensitive. They can have a lot of angularity in their face between their nose, their cheekbone, their chin. They can have a square jaw. Often their skin is easy to burn. It's often smooth. It's often oily. Their gums can be tender and easy to bleed. This is really common with Pitta, and that part of that is hyperacidity in the mouth. Pittas in general have a hard time with hyperacidity. Their body is just producing so much of this force of digestion, which is basically like bile. It's acids, right? That they can easily become hyperacidic in the digestive tract, up through the mouth, down through the anus. Their hair tends to be oily. They have a lot of oil in their system. So skin oily, hair oily. In terms of the Pitta body frame, it's more triangular. Like in Vata, we talked about how it's more rectangular between the shoulders and the hips. Pitta types will have broader shoulders and narrower waist when they're at their optimal weight. And so it gives us the body more of that triangular type of shape. They tend to have, moderate chest size, moderate muscle to bone ratio. They're not ectomorphic like Vatas, or endomorphic like Kaphas. They're more mesomorphic, and the mesomorphics are Pittas. So in terms of their digestion, this is one of the easiest ways to identify if you have more Pitta is you'll tend to have a very strong appetite. You'll tend to be able to eat more and more frequently than other people. The whole hangry word of people that get angry when they're hungry, that's more of a Pitta type. It's actually a Pitta imbalance in digestive fire. The quick digestion also has quick elimination. So Pitta types will tend to eliminate more than once a day. Their stools can be very loose, very oily, or slick. And they'll often have a very, like a surplus of thirst. They'll be very, very thirsty. They can drink a lot of water, a lot more water than the other types. Emotions we already covered, that they have this critical mind, and in extremes it goes to anger, it goes to hate, it goes to jealousy. They can have pretty extreme views and a lot of energy behind those views. Intellectually, they tend to be very accurate in their responses. They tend to have a very distinct recollection in their memory. Their dreams can be much more intense. They tend to be conflict-oriented or problem-solving oriented. When Pitta types have sleep issues, it tends to be because their mind is like trying to solve problems. Whereas Vata types, their mind can get overwhelmed or have an emotion of fear. For Pitta types, it's more, there's actually can be a lot of violence. Scary dreams can be, if there's sort of an anger or violent nature to them, or more on the Pitta side. Pittas often need less sleep, or so they think, and yet their sleep is often sound and deep. So sometimes when people are getting away with like the 6 to 8 hours, they're more of a Pitta type when that sleep is deep and hard, and they wake up and they're like ready to rock. Again, their speech can be sharp. It can be penetrating. Money-wise, they tend to want to make a lot of money, whereas their counterparts might not have that desire. They tend to like luxuries or just really high-quality things. So when I look at like the modern minimalist movement, where you have a high aesthetic and a desire for high-quality items, to me, it's very Pitta. So in terms of the type of symptoms of Pitta, like a lot of them appear in the digestive tract. So due to having a tendency towards strong digestion that can easily go to hyperacidity, they can also tend towards hypoglycemia or low blood sugar, often because their appetite is, they burn through things really quickly. If a Pitta type person isn't having a good meal in the middle of the day, often what happens is they become hypoglycemic and they're not allowing enough time to just eat and digest and allow their blood sugar to stabilize, and they can become lightheaded because of that. They can get headaches because of not eating on schedule, on time, particularly the biggest meal in the middle of the day. Having acid indigestion, that can actually show up as laryngitis, as it starts to like burn up the throat. They can have all sorts of the symptoms of hyperacidity and heartburn. They can have even like burning feeling in their rectum and anus with feces due to the bile content. Often their energy level is intense, but they can get exhausted. They can get exhausted from excessive thinking. So this is all the stuff that happens out of balance. Because of their sensitivity of skin, they can have rashes or hives or urticaria. They can often have psoriasis or eczema. Those can also be mixed with Vata, the dryness of Vata, mixing with that oily, heat, irritable skin intensity of Pitta. In terms of their mouth health, because of hyperacidity, their mouth can easily get red or inflamed. Their gums can be tender. Their teeth can yellow easily. Their enamel of their teeth can get wasted. With Vatas, we didn't talk about this last time, but Vatas tend more towards cavities and receding gums and cracked enamel, whereas Kapha types tend to have strong white enamel. Pitta types go gray earlier in life or go bald earlier in life, and there's this belief in Ayurveda because there's so much heat in the head. So those are just some of the symptoms of Pitta. Usually digestive and skin is the first place that the person's really affected. Someone that's getting a lot of infections or has a lot of inflammation, we're also going to look at what's going on with Pitta. So one of the other questions around is like, how do you calm or how do you balance Pitta? I already mentioned that eating the biggest meal in the middle of the day is crucial for Pittas. Often they will get distracted by mental intensity, get distracted away from eating and taking in enough protein and fat to really ground their system for a slower metabolism. Because they're such hyper metabolizers, they don't, if they eat a high carb diet, their body's just going to like burn through everything really quickly. So having a substantial meal in the middle of the day that's higher in protein and higher in fat can really help a Pitta person. Pittas have to learn how to turn off, right? Because their mind is so strong and they have a desire to go and go and go and go. Just having developing a strong discipline to not working after the sun goes down. That can be a phenomenal lifestyle change for Pitta to actually unplug. The time between 6 p.m. and 10 p.m., that's the time of Kapha. That's the time of earthy, watery energy. It's the time of connecting and being with our people and relaxing, enjoying, reflecting on the day. And a person with a Pitta type with a Pitta imbalance will tend to burn the candle at both ends and keep working after dinner, checking email or doing, multitasking, getting everything done before going to bed. And that leads to a Pitta imbalance. They're violating the rhythm of rejuvenation, that rejuvenation part of the cycle. And like I've mentioned in the past podcasts, like the whole 80-20 rule of just saying like, hey, yeah, there's more to do than you can get done. But if you're smart about it, you're going to be like Abe Lincoln. You're going to spend more time sharpening the axe than chopping down the tree. You're going to spend more time really deciding what deliberate actions that you're actually going to take, what actions need to get done, what actions don't need to get done, and therefore can come off of your to-do list. This is quite a practice for Pitta. The practice of meditation for Pitta allows the mind to unwind. It allows some of the mental, emotional digestion to happen. I mentioned before how Pitta types can be really intense and how other people can be burned up literally by Pitta's intensity. So for a Pitta to have time each day to sit and to reflect on their interactions and to develop compassion and to develop empathy just through the practice of sitting in silence and letting go of some of their mental intensity and some of their drive and just experiencing awareness as such is very deeply healing and deeply balancing for Pitta. And that will enable more compassion and empathy in their everyday interactions, which will enable much more nourishing long-term relationships, much more fun, friendly, softer relationships for the Pitta person. So certain foods really aggravate Pitta, and the foods that aggravate Pitta are the ones that have the same nature as Pitta. So spicy, hot, oily foods are like fire, right? We talked about the adjectives, the gunas of Pitta being hot and sharp and oily and spreading. So if the foods have those qualities, they will aggravate Pitta. It was the very first yogi detox. It was 2002. And I had a client who was brought in by his partner, and he was like kind of like grudgingly going along with it. And she's like, he has a Pitta imbalance. She was also an Ayurvedic practitioner or studying to become one. And I was like, all right, we'll see what that's all about. So in his intake with me, he tells me that he puts hot sauce on all of his food. Like 3 meals a day, he had hot sauce. And if I looked at his body type, his skin was oily, he's balding, he was, strong, lithe musculature, which is common in Pittas. He had a lot of drive. He was a small business owner, loved to, have control of his time and his lifestyle, all stuff very typical of Pitta. And what happened was fascinating. So in the yogi detox process, we had him stop putting hot sauce on all his food and start eating khichdi, which is just a mild dish with rice and mung beans and milder spices. We had him using coriander and turmeric, which are great detoxifying Pitta spices, fennel as well. And what happened is he actually broke out in fever. His body started to just dump all of this heat, and that lasted for days, like 4 or 5 days. And he felt, it was interesting, and this often happens in detox, where you actually feel okay, even though your body has a lot of symptoms. And that's what was happening, is he felt okay, but he was noticing just these massive, basically hot flashes, night sweats, as his body was just dumping this excess heat. Pitta types are often aggravated by oily foods. So fried foods, my daughter, for instance, she's very easily Pitta aggravated. So foods that aggravate Pitta are oily foods, fried foods, even foods that actually just higher in internal heating capacity, like eggs, can really affect a Pitta person. So for Pitta types to avoid those foods and to avoid the hot sauce and the super hot spices, really what'll happen is they'll start to notice that they can appreciate a diversity of tastes. Pitta types are often attracted to to spicy foods, to oily foods, to fast foods, more or less because of the intensity. They like that their body has quick elimination. They like the intensity that hot sauce adds to increase the focus of their mind. There's a little bit of an excitotoxin that happens with hot spices. And, when a person who needs to avoid those Pitta aggravating foods what they start to notice is they appreciate a diversity of tastes. A lot of the spices that are great for Pitta types are like lemongrass and cilantro, some of these gentler flavors like spearmint, coriander seeds. And it's not that they have to avoid all heat. It's just the mellower spices are, and the fresher the herbs, the better. And as the Pitta starts to diversify their taste, they start to actually lose the intensity. So the Pitta aggravated hot sauce guy, he actually post-cleanse, he didn't have the cravings to add hot sauce to all of his food anymore. His body was able to put 2 and 2 together and be like, no, not so much. Now, if we look at long-term effects of Pitta imbalances, and in this series, we're not going to get into more advanced Ayurvedic pathogenesis like we do in the Living Ayurveda course. But what can basically happen is the body is storing that heat, and it's storing that heat in the tissue, and it can come out as skin rashes. It can come out as headaches. It can come out as liver aggravation. It can come out as a tendency towards infections, all different types of infections in all different areas of the bodily tissue, depending on where the tissue is weak. So for Pittas to pay attention to decrease the oily foods, only have really high quality good fats like avocados and avocado oil or coconut oil. These are on the cooler sides of oils. Almonds are a phenomenal source of fat for Pitta. In avoiding rancid oils, avoiding any kinds of fast foods. Pittas are super sensitive, part of their cutting edge intellect. They also, they need to avoid chemicals. And if you think about it, it's interesting because Pitta controls the endocrine system in the body, and the endocrine system has a chemical nature. If you think of a chemical fire, right, where you're burning chemicals in a fire and it turns all different colors, the nature of chemicals themselves are Pitta. So as our diets are increasingly exposed to chemicals, right, whether it's petrochemicals as part of conventional agriculture, pesticides, fertilizers, all of those chemicals, Pittas are much, much more sensitive to than Kaphas. And so for a Pitta type to just actually look at a very clean, very mild, nutritionally substantial diet. Like what's very deeply nourishing is these cooler, very clean foods. The Pitta will thrive, and they'll notice that they're not attracted to the fried foods, they're not attracted to the hot spices, they're not attracted to the oily stuff. In terms of other tips to calm Pitta, so in general, those things that I mentioned earlier about unplugging. One of the things that I notice is having rejuvenation breaks. So if I have like a period of intensity for an hour or two at work, I'll take a walk, or I'll even like sit for 10 minutes and meditate, or I'll just lay down on the couch and close my eyes for 10 minutes. Or I might just do a bit of a movement break on my foam roller, or do some yoga. Having these breaks throughout the day helps that intensity diffuse. So Pitta is the shape of an arrow. It's the shape of a triangle. It's that shape of triangular directional change. And so if you think about it, like all of the energy going to a point, that's the natural thing for Pitta, and that's what makes it sharp. And so in Ayurveda, we always do the opposites. The opposites reduce each other. And so for a Pitta type to just allow their energy to diffuse is so important. And so instead of trying to like pack in more and more and more and more into their day, they should actually focus on taking a lot out and just having very specific aligned action, buffered by periods of rejuvenation. And when they do that, they're going to find that they're actually much more effective. They're able to get much more done in less time. And even more importantly, they're able to enjoy the process. Pittas can be so goal-oriented that they forget to enjoy the journey of life. All right, I hope that's helpful. For those who really want to take a deep dive into living Ayurveda, into understanding Ayurveda, into becoming their own self-healer or family healer with Ayurveda, that's why I offer the Living Ayurveda course. Now's really one of the best times to actually get enrolled. And if you're interested, go to yogahealer.com/conversation. Just fill out that form and have a conversation about Ayurveda and what you want to learn from it, or what you're hoping Ayurveda can do for you. I know for me, learning Ayurveda earlier in my life, like really diving deep in my 20s into deep Ayurvedic wisdom with teachers and gurus, was something that I knew would pay off for the rest of my life. Like the path of the self-healer, to really know your constitution, to know how you go out of balance, to be able to read the signs and symptoms of other people that are out of balance in terms of the doshas, and help them self-correct really easily, really simply, with an elegant system. I mean, I wouldn't trade it for the world. And that's what everyone says that goes through the Living Ayurveda course with me is, once you have this wisdom, you can't not see through the perspective of Ayurveda. It's a wisdom that just keeps giving back to you year after year, decade after decade of your life. So again, if you're interested in that, go to yogahealer.com/conversation and have a conversation with us. All right, in the next episode, we'll get into Kapha dosha, what it's all about, Kapha constitutions, how Kapha goes out of balance, and what to do to come back into dynamic harmony. Again, this is CATE STILLMAN with the Yogahealer Podcast. Namaste, and have a great day. I have this and actually other tip sheets at yogahealer.com/tip-sheets. You can see all the tip sheets there. In the show notes for this episode, we'll hyperlink the how to be a Pitta, the Thrive Guide from me, CATE STILLMAN. And there's some other great tips on it, including using more chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is your friend. Eating more green. These are huge for Pitta. They decrease fire. Having more of a vegetarian diet. Beans are better for Pitta. And other tips around attuning to the moon cycle as opposed to the heat of the sun cycle. So again, you can find this and other tip sheets in the show notes. Enjoy.